Hi, this is Wei Lin. I'm a medical doctor in the state of Washington. I grew up in China, and I would like to share with you my experience growing up in a dictatorship communist nation. And I want my experience to be a warning to those who enjoy the freedom uh, offered by the Constitution in the US, that this freedom can be lost if we allow the lefty ideology to take over our society. First, I would like you to know a little bit more about how I grew up and what my experiences were. I grew up in the southern part of China in a city named Guangzhou. It is a pretty good sized city. When I was there, it was maybe about 2-3 million people, and now close to 10 million. At at the time that I was growing up, mostly it was during the so-called Cultural Revolution that started in 1966 and ended with Mao's death in 1976. During that time, the overriding feature of life was poverty and submission. In terms of poverty, it was not only just a lack of material good, it was also poverty of ideas and thoughts because of the lack of freedom. In the store, usually there is not much you can choose from. Everything was rationed. We were to live on a certain amount of rice per person and only about a pound and a half of meat, usually pork, a month per each person. And for any vegetable, we have to go to the market early to stand in line, to wait for them to have the vegetable available and get your small portion. And if you are too late, everything would be gone. Uh, the kind of selection that we have enjoy here in the supermarkets or whatever place where we get our goods from was unheard of. There was also a poverty of thoughts. You know, you would think that we probably knew that we were poor, but actually we didn't, because all the propaganda that we heard was that China was the most wonderful place because we had a savior named Mao Zedong who saved us from the the hell of capitalists and from the colonialism of the Western nations. And there were 2/3 of people in the world waiting for us to liberate them. So, and everything that we thought about was whatever was pumped to us from the official media, and they will all publish the same kind of article every day, and that's toting the party line. And there was very little hope of how things could be different, except for maybe climbing up the ladder by being submissive to what the Communist Party wanted you to do or say or think. People are generally timid. At least I knew that my parents were, in terms of expressing any idea that could be original or anything that may be out of line from what is prevailing in the party line. My father grew was not a one of those favored class of people, because at the time that we were growing up, the favorite class of people were worker, peasants, soldiers, and those were the ones that were held up high in the society. My father, when he was younger, before the communists took over, he worked for the entrepreneur and helped him run the company when his boss escaped to Hong Kong before the communists take over. So he became labeled as someone who sided with the capitalist, and therefore he was not to be trusted by the laborer or the workers. So he was chased out of his position of leadership later on during one of the political campaigns led by the Communist Party. And so he had worked rest of his career as a welder, which he wasn't really very physically gifted for, because he had always been small framed, and he was more suited for working in the office, using his mind rather than his physical strength. So he pretty much worked the rest of his the second half of his working career in a kind of depressed state because how he was treated. And that also built his personality as someone who is very circumspect. He wouldn't want to be noticed for anything. He paid a lot of attention to us in our growing up to make sure we grow up being careful in our life and not be caught into any of these political crossfire. And so that was how we grew up as kind of ordinary people. We lived in very small space. Out of a family of 5, we had just one bedroom. It's about 100 square feet, and 1/3 of a living room because it was shared with 2 other families. And that was all the living space we had. And we shared with the other 2 families a common kitchen and a common bathroom. And even that was somewhat of a luxury at the time. So this level of poverty was very common. And I would say that we actually weren't considered very poor at that time. We were just average. Our family had one bicycle, and that it took a couple years of saving to get that. And the reason why China was so poor was because Mao's central government economic policies. He controls everything, what you can grow with your land, how much you're supposed to yield from your crop, how much you have to turn over to the government, what you can sell and what you can keep for yourself. And all the industries were owned by the state, and therefore people basically didn't have a strong motivation to put in more work. Everybody knew that if you get some power or you achieve a higher rank in the party ladder, you'll be able to live better. And so everybody try to appease those who are higher up, sometimes giving bribes. And otherwise, there was not much hope in your future. People were very afraid that they can be turned in by someone else as a person who had espoused any anti-revolutionary ideas, which just means that if you say anything, or even if you hinted to anything that's contrary to what the party line says, there is no diversity of thought at all. And that's the way that life was until I was about to finish high school. And after that, that was after Mao's death. In Deng's time, when Deng Xiaoping was the leader, he opened up the economy and also the university system so that people could get into university by virtue of their academic merit. And that's when I went into medical school. But even after that, all our job was still assigned by um, the institutions, which is led by the Communist Party committees. And because I wasn't someone who was particularly good at um, getting them to getting myself to be on their favorite people list, I I couldn't advance my career, and that's when I decided to come to the United States. I came to the United States in 1987. That was 4 years after I finished medical school. I was a surgical resident. I wanted to advance my career in probably as a surgical oncologist. But after trying many times to, get a position or get fellowship into a uh, hospital with more advanced technology or medical science for in this area, I have been blocked in many different ways by the party leaders in the hospital I worked in. So I finally listened to friends who had come to the United States then and said, okay, so since I wasn't able to continue to advance my career, I would like to try going to the United States. I've heard that there's more freedom there. I've heard that academically they're more advanced. So I came by applying for a graduate student um, with scholarship in different universities and was finally accepted at University of Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. Um, yeah, at that time, the thought was simpler. Just wanted to, build a better career as a um, cancer treating doctor, and maybe to have a better life for myself. I hadn't thought about, why the US was so much better, not only in having advanced technology, but also life being more enjoyable at that time. Uh, but, since there was a opportunity to come, and if I didn't, I would never know uh, how life was like in the US and why it was better. So we decided to take that opportunity to come. And it was not easy because I really didn't have a lot of savings after working as a resident for 4 years in China. We barely could put up enough money to buy the tickets, um, and I had $200 in my pocket when I came here. My first month's rent was paid for by my friend who came here a couple years ago and found me an apartment, and we share with two other graduate students. What I love most about America, I think there was a gradual increase in appreciation of what made America great. You know, at first, what attracted me to America was that there was better academic achievement here. We all knew that technology and medical sciences were much more advanced in US than in China. We also noticed that people were living life, with the more abundance. At the time that I came, I think China, after having a more open economy for a few years, we were not being rationed, and we were able to get enough food, and there were some choices in the supermarket, but still we were still lacking at least decades behind the US in terms of a standard of life. One simple thing was that after a year in the US, I was able to save up enough money from the even meager graduate students scholarship to buy a secondhand car. So that have afforded me a significant degree of freedom that I didn't have. And I was able to enjoy the life of an average American a little more closely to how they enjoy life. I could drive from Buffalo to Niagara Falls to Toronto or down to New York City or Philadelphia to see different parts of U.S. and enjoy the the comfort that you could go to just basically about most places in the U.S. and was treated kindly, honestly, and see people who can be fairly open about what they think and treat each other respectfully and very law abiding as well. And the economy, sometimes you wonder when you don't have a central plan to control what people would produce and how they uh, must meet certain needs, how could it run smoothly? But gradually, we understood that when you give people freedom uh, to pursue their own dreams, and when there is um, basic laws laid down in the Constitution to guarantee their rights, but the basic laws to ensure a fairness in competition. And most of the time, it works out pretty well in that everybody was putting out their best efforts, not only to enrich their own life, but in the process, produce goods for others that enrich other people's life. I think that's maybe the first 2 3 years that how I understood America. And then subsequently, as the Tiananmen Square movement in China started, that was 2 years after I came to the States. We in the US also started forming groups to support them. And then after they were, brutally cracked down by the government, we continued to advocate for the change to democracy in China. And these groups that I was leading, one of the group I was leading in Buffalo, wanted to have celebration or commemoration on the 1 year anniversary of June 4th. And when we put in the application to hold the event in Rose Garden, Buffalo, it was denied by the city hall. And at the encouragement of some of my friends, we took the mayor to court in order to overturn that decision. And that was the first time that I saw in action that how the First Amendment protects citizens to have the freedom to assemble, the freedom to speak, and also, later on, I understood that also as the freedom to live and practice their religion. So, and eventually you understand more about the greatness of the American founding system, and that's the Constitution as the guide rail for how the country and how the governments are to be built in order to protect the rights of people, and protecting the right of people as this supreme goal of the United States government. And that's some of the things I love most about America. Now, I'm seeing a gradual change over the last maybe 10 years, but especially during the last 2 or 3 years, that we're losing these um, virtues of America as a society and as a nation. Um, the so-called cancel culture and the wokeism that became more and more pervasive in our society over the last 10 years. It's very palpable in academia. Even though I work in a more private setting, I'm not working in academia, but as you read journal articles, as you see what's published in the society meetings, you will see that there is a political correct agenda that all these organizations had to follow. And if you don't follow these political agenda, for instance, um, there is a overriding agenda to push for so-called climate change policies, and therefore, when the weather is getting warm, you would say this is the effect of global warming. But even if it wasn't getting warm, there is a agenda for climate change in order to blame um, the industrialization or the so-called carbon consumption uh, as the cause of these whatever we're experiencing. And if you dare to say otherwise, you can be um, blacklisted. And there is also a promotion of a racial agenda to suppress anything that's associated with what they call whiteness, and to the point even calling uh, the virtue of working hard, being punctual, and having goals to motivate yourself to better yourself and for the good of the society as being something that's racist. That's just totally absurd. It brings me back to the time when I was in China. During the Cultural Revolution, there was a time when they promote people who turn in a blank slate at the time of college entry exam. He said, well, the reason I turned into blank slate, I didn't write anything on my exam booklet because I haven't been taught anything. I I work all my life, and therefore I had no opportunity for education. And I'm a victim of the lack of that education, and therefore you have to compensate me by accepting me into college. But not only that, but also that I will dictate on what you can teach and what you should teach in college. And that was something that happens in the Cultural Revolution. But unfortunately, we were seeing that here in the United States. But it represented in a way that's not classified by class, as in whether you were poor or rich, but rather by race, whether you were black, brown, or white. And I can see the kind of a copying of some of those ideas that China used to basically um, overturn the education system for the worse. And now it became popular, became in vogue in United States. And so much so that people who were going into some of the most prestigious institutions, colleges, were following all that example to demand their college to change their admission criteria or change the education curriculum to meet that kind of agenda. And I thought that was absurd. That was totally self-destructive. And but nobody dare say anything because one of the few academic chairmen or directors who were willing to say, "Hey, we have to make sure that our admissions are based on merit," and they were immediately attacked by a group of mobs. May not be physical, but there may be enough verbal attack and abuse that these people usually end up resigning. And I thought that's horrible. And America, the academic culture turning this way is going to lead to a whole new generation that go through these top university to become total Marxist that will promote a Marxist agenda, and that's going to destroy America. And lo and behold, that even culminates in 2022, all the riots that were, looked at as mostly peaceful, when the whole city block was burning right behind the camera. Yeah, that is totally unbelievable. In that a once great nation that speak the truth, that can promote people based on merits and hard work, would have devolved into a place where uh, people could just uh, parrot a few of these political correct slogan and get away with literal murder. Um, this is exactly what China was like um, during the Cultural Revolution. People could just say, "I'm loyal to Chairman Mao," and therefore they would start attacking other people and breaking down anything, and just in the name of supporting Chairman Mao, and they could get away with anything. And now America is turning that way. um, we must stop that. We must stop the woke culture. We must stop the cancel culture. We must bring back meritocracy as in our education system. Uh, and the United States, the America that I love most, was the one that was following the tradition that has built it the way it is, not the one that is turning itself into. I hope that people in America wake up and stop this crazy dash into the cliff before it's too late. Thank you.